Well, I guess we didn't think it would be like last weekend every weekend, did we? Welcome to Turf Moor, where Norwich City have been done 2-0, which I think is the most accurate way of putting it. Chris Wood with a double, scoring twice in 4 first half minutes. The 10th minute, the 14th minute. By the 25th minute, Burnley probably had done enough to sit back and go, yeah, thanks very much. And the game was won. So it's been a tough old afternoon here at Turf Moor for Norwich against Burnley. Clearly in the context and comparison of Manchester City, that will be played out a lot of the weekend, and I'll probably tuck into it quite nicely in my piece for The Athletic as well as the comparison with West Ham and the game there, because I think going into today, that was the one I wanted to look at. Norwich City are trying to figure out how to go about their away games in the Premier League compared to the Championship. Let's be honest, they were very good away from home in the Championship last season, better than anyone in fact, so it's not something that shouldn't work, but it's quite apparent how difficult the task is trying to do that against Premier League sides that are established. I mean, West Ham do look like they should be a decent side this season. I would have to say I can't see Burnley really getting dragged into relegation trouble given how good they are at what they do. More of that in a bit. So if Norwich were to finish above either of these sides, it would be phenomenal, and I would have to say probably quite unlikely. Go to Palace on the horizon, that's probably a different question given where Palace are. So it will be perhaps an interesting comparison for that one going ahead. But in terms of today, it's been it's hard because you'd like to think no one got ahead of themselves off the back of beating Manchester City. And I agree with Daniel Farke in that they looked, he sort of used the word scared, and it was almost like they didn't quite fully believe they would be able to play the ball around. Not when they stepped out onto the pitch, but I think once they were on the pitch and faced by up to 6 Burnley players pressing them very hard, they just couldn't work through it. Now, be that from their own inabilities in that they weren't playing the ball quickly enough, or they weren't being good enough in their own possession. But that, it's a bit like, say, a rugby tackle. If you throw yourself into a rugby tackle at 95% because you're unsure about something, you might get injured. Sometimes you have to be fully committed into what you're doing to physically make it work. And there's no doubt Norwich, when they were on the pitch in that environment, just didn't quite seem to believe they could get around it, and so then they went a bit long, and ultimately that played into Burnley's hands as well. So those first 25 minutes were pretty horrendous. It could have been worse than 2-0, and the whole game could have finished worse than 2-0. I imagine Burnley knew that they couldn't sustain that and kind of got control of themselves. Norwich then huffed and puffed from then on in. They had some decent possession. Moritz Leitner hit the woodwork with a shot in the first half. He missed the target by a whisker in the second. Has to be said, Norwich broke into the Burnley half once while it was still 0-0. Teemu Pukki had a great chance and Nick Pope made a fantastic save with his feet. That sort of thing happens and then the whole game does change, and it's a crucial moment, one that Norwich say benefited from against Manchester City but ultimately didn't this afternoon. So this was a very frustrating game, I have to say, because we've been watching Norwich for a fair while now, haven't we? And we know that they play football in a complex way, in a beautiful way, in a flowing way. They're intricate. They try and use their guile. They play it short. They try and move. So they complicate football because that's how they create their spaces and their chances. That's not what Burnley do. Burnley get it long. They hit it up forwards and then try and pick up the second balls. They get it wide, and it's a bit like when you're playing, like back in the day, let's say SWAS, and you'd sort of fanny around playing possession football for a bit because it's good, and then the other team would just score and you'd be really annoyed, so you do the one move that you knew got you back into the game. And that's what Burnley do. They do the move that gets you goals. They as I said, the first goal is kind of inexplicable, defending from Norwich to leave the near post so empty. I don't exactly know what happened there, and I need to look into it properly. The second one, Dwight McNeil gets to the byline, good cross. Wood is ahead of Ben Godfrey and prods it home, and that's frustrating because it's so straightforward. And I think I tweeted, it's a bit like being beaten up by your older brother. They're like a bit stronger and they've been living for longer, and they can just do things that they know wind you up because you haven't quite done it for long enough and you haven't got enough life experience to deal with your older brother. And that was pretty much how the game panned out. I have to say, I didn't think at any point Burnley were really in trouble, and that's annoying. And that probably comes with being a newly promoted side. You've got to adjust to feeling that you've got enough confidence and belief in what you're doing in a Premier League setting to be able to do it effectively. So that's probably where Norwich are, and let's be honest, it's still September, so loads of time to go. I was thankful, by the way, that it's a glorious blue sky and we're at Turf Moor in September. I definitely appreciate that. I'm not going to take that for granted. Injuries, still a massive issue. Alex Tettey went off after, I think it was 10... It was before it went 1-0, I think. It was 7 minutes, really early. He went off with a quad strain. Not really a bad one by all accounts, but that's not great. Ralph Farman missed today because he's having his groin scanned, so that's a slight worry. Tim Krul had a back spasm during his warm-up, so had to take some painkillers, got through the game, but obviously that's not ideal because if you have Krul and Farman out, you've got Michael McGovern and who else steps in from behind him. And obviously Tim's very important in terms of how he plays the ball and how Norwich build, so that's a worry. Ben Godfrey was limping through the mixed zone. I think he is managing something at the moment by all accounts, so that's not ideal. It has to be said that Ibrahim Amadou was slightly lucky to stay on the pitch because he probably should have picked up a second yellow card. There were some claims for a penalty for Burnley. I haven't seen it. I thought the ref was inconsistent towards both sides all game. That does happen. It wasn't really any kind of impact in the game, to be honest. And yeah, just a few late substitutions from Daniel Farke. We could have seen Patrick Roberts on earlier. We saw some of the poorer bits from Emi Buendia that we saw before the Man City game, and not so much of the good stuff. And as I said, Burnley looked comfortable because Norwich got to the edge of the area all too many times and kind of struggled to unpick things. Players, say like Sam Byram, who did well in a kind of compact setting at home to Man City, struggled with things being a little bit more expansive this afternoon, and they did kind of miss Max Aaron's energy. And Norwich got a lot of players who would have started today's game who are out, so they could really do with getting a few of those bodies back just to freshen things up. And that might be why Daniel Farke didn't make the changes earlier or differently, but I'm not really sure the options he had on the bench that those changes were necessarily going to make a difference. The game was kind of over after 20 minutes, sadly. At this level, Norwich got plenty more to learn. Of course, as I said, The Athletic, my analysis on there will be on the website. Make sure you clock in there too as well, because it's a great interview with Ian Henderson from last week. And actually my column last week factors into it. It mentioned that on XG, Norwich were down to lose today and at Palace. So let's hope XG doesn't prove maybe the defining factor, but it would certainly be good if Norwich could pick up something on the road at Palace at the weekend, because trends get set at this time of the season, and certainly in terms of the defending, there are things that Norwich do need to work on and need to have a side that they have that Daniel can work on to improve them. But as always, thanks for watching. If you came, have a safe trip back. If you didn't travel, fair play, and we'll see you during next week. But for now, it finished Burnley 2, Norwich City 0. On to the next one.